Today we're going to be talking about the new expansion for Logic and Lore, one of my favorite two-player deduction games. I reviewed it in the past, but to quickly touch you up to speed on how the game works. Each player has a set of cards numbered 1 through 9, and the goal of the game is to be the first player to arrange all 9 cards in numerical order. But the kicker is you can't see your own cards, you can only see your opponent's cards. Instead, they pick 2 cards from their tableau, hold it up for their opponent to see, and begin asking questions about those cards. Now there's a list of very specific questions that they have to ask, and they ask them in a certain order, opting to skip over some if they'd like, because as soon as they get an affirmative answer of any type, that ends their turn. Now, I think the rules state that this needs to be done at the beginning of the turn, but really, at any point, players can shift their cards around to try to put them in some sort of order. Again, always face down, in an attempt to put them in sequential order using the information that they got during a round. However, they cannot be revealed until you're ready to either win or lose the game by declaring at the beginning of your turn that you wish to reveal. You flip all of your cards, and if they are in sequential order, you win the game, and if they're not, you lose the game. Now, when I originally reviewed Logic and Lore, it was in a prototype form, and everything about it is fantastic. The production value, nice, large, shiny tarot cards. Yeah, it's really, really good looking. And again, this is a very simple game to understand how to play. However, it is one of those Logic games that I'm very, very bad at, but really, really enjoy. Now, Logic and Lore Variance is here, the first expansion. And as an expansion, it does exactly what I love a good expansion to do. An expansion for a game that I already love, which is leave the core gameplay alone. Logic and Lore does that. It adds some new variants in terms of the types of questions you ask, how you ask those questions, and even improve some aspects. First and foremost, and my favorite addition to this, and it's such a simple thing, are the notepads and the tokens. I have a pretty hard time tracking and remembering information, especially just in my head. So the addition of these notepads, which are an awful lot like the type of notepad you get in Clue, are very helpful. How it works is there are alphabetical tokens. You can use these tokens to place onto cards themselves so that you know that, okay, this card is token A, and then your notepad corresponds to that. You can eliminate things that you know that it may or may not be. You can add notes specifically to token A, and it helps you. It's just it's a small addition that made a massive improvement for me, and is like, I remember I tried this out at OrcaCon, and I said, this is like my favorite. This should have been included in the base game. This is fantastic. And so for those that find tracking that information so difficult that it is frustrating and not fun to play, this is the improvement that you might be looking for something like this. In addition, there are 2 new gameplay modes that utilize the shiniest addition to this game, the dice, of which I am also a sucker for. First, there's Starflight. In Starflight, each of the players picks a mouse meeple and uses it as a token to move around the Starflight board. Now, Starflight utilizes a card that you move around using each die as both a space and a reference number for some of the questions that you can ask. You can spend resources to travel further along on your turn, and each die that you pass gets re-rolled, and you gain resources to spend as you pass around the entire board, so that you can use those resources to further manipulate what specific number you might get, and that correlates to the questions that you can ask during the mode. There's also the Star Sprite mode, which has you use another board where you place the dice on the board. On your turn, you choose one of the available die, and then on your next turn, you swap the die for an existing choice. So every turn, you are taking a die that you used the last turn, placing it on the board, and pulling a new one. Now, because these die, there's only one of each type, and you're sharing this with your opponent, the options may not always be there. Now, you can spend 6 resources in order to take a die and move it to any face value that you'd like. In this mode, resources are used to alter the die value. However, the only way to regain resources is to choose the full gamut of dice available to you throughout the course of the game. So, Logic and Lore Variance. On the surface, the prettiest, most noticeable thing you're going to see are the dice, and that is I'm a big, big sucker for that kind of thing, because obviously I can use these in role-playing games if I want, and I'm excited to see what the final product is. That's cool. They work really, really well with the 2 new additional game modes, which again, don't change the core of the game, which I love so much at all. However, it adds an element of randomness, an element of strategy, and an element of just resource management. So maybe it makes that pure logic and deduction just slightly less pure, but for people like me, that is a good thing. As much as I love the core of this game, I think the variability of dice is exciting and makes it feel like I have a little bit more of a chance sometimes. Resource management is fun. It's something I'm always really into. So that's a big plus for me. However, the biggest boon for me has got to be the tokens and the note-taking pads, the notepads. This is something that I think maybe should have been included in the base game because it is such an improvement in terms of making the game more accessible and in that sense more fun for someone like me. I saw that, knowing nothing more about the game when I previewed this at OrcaCon, saw it on the table, and I immediately, I was like, this is incredible. This is something that I was willing to just buy the notepads for the base game. I didn't realize that this was like part of the expansion. So that's my favorite thing about this. Now, sure, you can look at this and say, really, there's minimal gameplay change. You're adding a few extra components to a game that admittedly I generally avoid, like the harder variants that were included in the base box. So this is just more content onto a game that I really stick to sort of the base version of. But the new base version, the new variants in this box are ones that I will default to. Both modes are interesting, they add variability, and they keep that core gameplay, and I can still keep that base difficulty to where I like it. And once I start to get better at it, maybe I'll include the black holes, which are pretty interesting, but add an element of uncertainty, which I am not quite ready for. This is an expansion that doesn't make a bad game good. It's an expansion that makes a really good game a little bit better. And if you have not delved into the world of logic and lore, I recommend you do so, be that the base game, and once you realize just how fantastic it is, the whole thing. Because Logic and Lore Variance is the type of expansion that keeps a good game good and then makes it a little bit better and a little bit prettier because there's a bunch of dice. Thank you so much for watching. My name is Daniel. I am Plumpy Thimble. And if you enjoyed this video, please like, subscribe, all that good stuff. I am on most forms of social media as @Plumpy Thimble, and I will see you next time.